Good morning and welcome to class 6. 6 or 7? What class are we on now? I should look at this before. Class 7. Okay, we're on class 7 of our Developmental Psychology course, Psych 250, NDSU Summer Term 2017. And today we're going to be talking about continuing our conversation of infants and toddlers, and we're going to be moving into personality and social development. Our picture of the day is this transgender couple in, I think, Brazil. They just had a baby last semester. They're both transgender, so dad is female to male and mom is male to female, and they have a baby together, and I just think that's really sweet. So I just thought I'd share that. As you know, we move forward in our semester, just kind of talking about different kinds of families and different kinds of developmental outcomes. So, like I said, we're going to be talking about social and personality development today. And I have with me some teaching assistants. So, I have Mr. Anger and Miss Sadness and Miss Joy. And then I also have miniature versions of um, Miss Disdain and Mr. Fear. So forgive me, I really like this lecture, so I just thought it would be fun to have our little teaching assistants with us today to give us inspiration as we move forward through social and personality development. The main theory that we're going to talk about today is Erickson's theory, and Erickson built on, so he's a psychoanalytic theorist, and he built on Freud's understanding that quality of parental relationship is important to a child's social development. And he argues that during this period of life, the basic conflict that a person has to resolve is basic trust versus mistrust. Um, and what he proposes that children trust sympathetic and loving caregivers and mistrust harsh and rigid caregivers. And actually, this is something that we have been able to empirically demonstrate that children, when there's a warm relationship with caregivers, tend to be more obedient and tend to trust more. And what this tells us is obviously that harsh punishment and rigid punishment are not effective methods of changing behavior. The other conflict that Erickson proposed was autonomy versus shame and doubt. And it's the key conflict of childhood um, that children want to be autonomous. They want to have control over their own lives. But at the same time, there's not a lot of competence going on. And so there's doubt. Can I actually do this? There's shame if you fail. But what Erickson proposed is that development is healthy when parents provide children with suitable guidance and reasonable choices. In other words, it's okay for children to make their own decisions and to be autonomous as long as parents are providing guidance and giving them reasonable choices to make. And so it's not necessarily a bad thing to give your children choices. You just have to make sure that they're reasonable choices, and that you enforce whatever decision you make regarding what choices they have. And the reason we're going to talk about emotions today is for infancy and toddlerhood, um, emotional development is a prime part of personality development and social development because emotions essentially drive everything that makes us unique. Um, our ability to understand the world and to interpret the input that we're receiving all comes from, in some degree, our emotions. And I think a lot of times we think about emotions in terms of good emotions and bad emotions. And today we're going to talk about why labeling emotions good and bad is actually counterproductive. The reality is that emotions are neutral. They don't have good or bad nature to them. They're both equally important. Both types are equally important. And It's how we respond to the emotions that can be either good for us or bad for us. And I don't like to term behaviors good or bad. I think you can find an element of good in every behavior and an element of bad in every behavior. It's more important to measure whether or not it actually does what we want it to do and is actually healthy for us and for everyone involved. And so, what I'd like to do now is just kind of walk you through each emotion and talk about what each emotion does, what it represents, and how it's adaptive in terms of our development. Because the reality is that emotions are all evolutionary programmed to ensure that we survive. And so all of them have a very adaptive nature to them. Um, um, so let's get started. So the first emotion that infants commonly experience is happiness. So we have our joy or happiness doll. And happiness represents a represents our reaction to stimuli that please us, that give us a sense of self-efficacy, that give us a sense of connectedness to other people. Happiness communicates to us on a subconscious level that we have something that's important to us, that makes us feel good, that should drive us to be better. Um, and for infants, happiness is communicated most commonly through smiles, and so um, you'll see with infants and toddlers, well, infants especially, the social smile, and that's that broad grin that infants have. So like if you're at the grocery store at a restaurant and they kind of smile at you and you smile back, they'll go, that's the broad grin or the social smile, and that appears about 6 to 10 weeks. Um, and for infants, the social smile and happiness as an emotion often represents pleasure at positive stimuli and recognition of mastery. So I enjoy what I have right now. I'm proud of myself because I've done something important. On a social aspect, though, so that's on a psychological aspect. It's sort of like its own self-reward. But on a social aspect, it encourages a positive bond between baby and caregiver. When our child or a child in general smiles at us, it makes us feel good. It makes us feel happy and appreciated and loved. Other signs of happiness start to emerge in infancy and toddlerhood, specifically laughter, which happens around 3 to 4 months. And babies laugh is just the best. Like you should go to YouTube after class and look at babies laughing, and if you're having a bad day, it'll definitely cheer you up. By the age of 6 months, the infants and toddlers have pretty normal, happy interactions with other people. So it's not just like the social smile and just laughing. It's like actually like seeking to make the other person happy, um, being being automatically happy at the sight of people that they care about. It's very intentional, and so that's where the sort of social aspect of emotions come into play. And by 1 year, we start to see different happy expressions with different people. So that could be different types of expressions. It could be different levels of intensity of that expression. It could be like, and we've probably all known a child that's more happier to see their mom than maybe their sibling or a stranger. I have to share. I saw the cutest thing yesterday. I was at um, where was I? I was somewhere in town. I didn't go very many places yesterday, so I don't know where it was. But I saw this sort of college age guy walking towards a minivan, and then a family that looked very much like him got out, and all the little siblings were running and giving a big hug, and I was like, oh, that's so sweet. I can't handle how sweet this is. So they probably haven't seen him in a while. It's just really sweet. There's like a little tiny brother who's probably like 3, who's like wrapped his whole body around his big brother. It was just so cute. I couldn't handle it. Where was it? I was either driving on the street or I was in a parking lot, but wherever I was, I couldn't stop and watch for too long because I didn't want to get hit. by another car, but it was really sweet. I just think that that demonstrates sort of this emotion of happiness. It's like, oh, life is perfect. It's complete. It's something that's important to me. Sadness is um, sadness is the second emotion that really starts to exhibit itself um, in infancy and toddlerhood. And I love this picture of sadness right here because I feel like this a lot of days. And so I just really identify with that picture. I actually identified with this character the most on this movie. This is from the movie Inside Out. If you haven't seen it, you should. It's a really great movie. It explains emotions in a really wonderful way. It's very accurate too. So here's my little sadness plush. Hello. He taught I used to be a child therapist. Um, Sadness is exhibited in infants and toddlers as distress, and at the removal of positive stimuli or introduction of negative stimuli. You take bottle away, baby cries. You take rattle away, baby cries. Baby bumps their head, they cry. Baby doesn't have mommy, they cry. And so it's not the more sophisticated sadness that we have as adults that represents the loss of something that's important to us. Um, I think one of the most profound things that was ever said to me was said when I was about to move to Fargo a couple years ago, and I was really sad, and I was really unhappy where I was living and with what I was doing, and I was in a really bad relationship. It was very abusive, and I was ready to come up here. I was ready to leave, um, but I was also very sad, and I didn't understand why. And I was talking to a friend, and it was like, why am I sad? Like I should be happy to be leaving this place, which coincidentally is the place I'm going back to at the end of the summer. And my friend said, well, if you weren't sad, then it didn't mean anything to you. The whole time you spent here was wasted. And I thought that was really profound, and I think that it is a perfect example of what sadness is. As it's a way of us recognizing that we have lost something important to us. It's a way of our brain processing that loss. And for small children, specifically infants and toddlers, sadness isn't that sophisticated because, and we'll talk more about this when we move into early childhood, but for the most part, small children aren't really able to think about a world outside of their own. And so it's hard to have that sophisticated sadness where you're sad because you've lost something important to you, because that often requires us to take into context the greater picture. If, part of my sadness at leaving Auburn was leaving people behind, and so part of that sadness was thinking about how it would affect them as well as me, whereas infants and toddlers aren't really able to do that. But over time, distress, which is much more a personal frustration and upset over not having something that one wants, um, develops into anger and sadness. So distress becomes anger, and distress becomes sadness because it's sort of a combination of both. So we have our little anger doll. Um, he also I identify with him a lot because I don't have a short fuse. I don't get angry very easily, but I get annoyed a lot, and so I'm a very cranky person naturally because I don't sleep well typically because I stay up really late and get up really early. So I kind of identify with this sort of like I'm frustrated a lot, and I like him because he's funny in the movie. You should watch the movie. You really should watch the movie. I'll probably watch the movie this afternoon after teaching. But sadness is less common than anger. It is in response to pain, removal of an object, and loss of positive parent-child interactions. So it it plays the role of informing the infant that there is some kind of issue that's causing them emotional pain. And so it's useful to feel sad because it helps the brain recognize and process the emotional pain that it's going through. Without it, we may not be aware of that pain and it could eat us up. So it's good to have it, and it's good to embrace the emotion of sadness. Anger. This is how I felt the other day. I was trying to get somewhere, and people in Fargo drive so slow. And it's like, they slow down to make a turn and they almost come to a complete stop, and you're like, dude, you don't have to come to a complete stop to make a right hand turn. What the hell? Or if there's a turn lane, just get in the damn turn lane. You don't have to stop and then move into the turn lane. Like, what is going on? I feel the same way about getting on the freeway when people are going 5 miles an hour down the acceleration lane. It's called an acceleration lane for a reason. You're supposed to accelerate to 75 miles an hour before you merge onto the freeway. You're supposed to be at the speed of the freeway when you get on it. Ugh. Do people not read the driver's manual? See, I'm a very cranky person. Anger begins to develop in increasing frequency and intensity as a person ages. And so this becomes very apparent between the ages of 4 and 6 months. And it usually results in increased, or often exhibits itself because children in this age range are having increased intentional behaviors, but also experiencing lack of autonomy and control. So in other words, they have a plan, they want to carry the plan out, but they don't often have the ability to do it because they're not free to do it, or they don't have the adequate muscle or gross motor control to do it. But anger in this period, this very early stage, is very much a general anger. I'm just mad in general. I'm not mad at anyone in particular, I'm just mad. But then, as infants get older, they're able to direct their anger at specific individuals. And you see infants do this. They'll be manipulative. Um, um, they'll be angry at mom, and then they'll go and be really loving on dad, and they're punishing, they're demonstrating their anger through punishment. It's really kind of sad to watch the early stages of emotional and the manipulation develop in children, but um, but over time, though, the point to take away is that anger is able to be directed at specific people. The anger itself has a very useful evolutionary adaptive nature. Anger is our brain's way of identifying that we are at risk. Um, we see we see someone hurting someone we care about, we get angry because we feel threatened, or this person is being threatened, and because we love them and we're connected to them, we are indirectly threatened. And so anger is our brain's way of identifying that a boundary has been crossed, that something important to us that we have established as an essential line that cannot be crossed has indeed been crossed. It's a way of protecting ourselves. It's a way of of building up the energy to lash back in protection, to push people back across that boundary. Um, Yesterday I was at cocktail hour with some friends, and my friend was talking about how he was walking his dog the other day, and this bigger dog. So his dog's like a cockapoo or something. It's like I don't know, a cocker spaniel and poodle mix. Cockapoo, is that what they're called? That sounds better than like a pooker. So, um, but anyway, he, this larger dog, charged his dog Busby, and he leaned down and picked up the dog, and like shielded him from the other dog, and was like lashing out at the other dog. And I think that's a perfect example of how anger is helpful. You know, anger doesn't have to be explosive. It can very controlled. In fact, when I get angry, I tend to be much more calm than I am when I'm just generally calm, because my anger makes me more aware and makes me more firm in my resolve. That's sort of how I respond to anger. Other people are different. They'll explode. Like my granddad explodes when he gets angry. You don't want to be around him. And you probably could think about how you get angry. And the only times I ever get like violently, explosively angry is if someone is at imminent risk of getting hurt. Then I tend to be much more like a mama lion. But when it comes to like everyday things that, and I guess I don't get angry every day, but like when people anger me, typically when people anger me, and especially if I care about them, my response is very calm, but pretty firm in my resolve. So anger notifies us that someone has crossed a boundary and that we are potentially at risk because of that. Fear is another early developing emotion. We've got a little fear figurine. Hello. I love his little bug eyes. You see, isn't that adorable? And his face. That's sort of what I look like in the morning when I see myself in the mirror for the first time. You know, it's like, oh gosh, I gotta put all the makeup on. Fear develops in the second half of year one, so about 6 to 7, 8 months. And it occurs in response most often to the unknown, new toys, heights. A key fear, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later, is stranger anxiety, so the fear of unfamiliar adults. Um, Again, fear, like anger, is a way of our brain identifying that there is some kind of imminent risk to oneself. It's a way of protecting us to keep us from just boldly charging in a situation where a new situation or a strange situation where we could potentially get hurt. It's sort of like a failsafe. In fact, infants who are fearless, so to speak, who exhibit less fear tend to get hurt a lot more because they're not as cautious. Um, Part of fear is establishing a secure base. And so infants will use familiar caregivers as a reference point when they're exploring new things around them. So if you ever go to like any place where there's like a parent with a small child and the small child is kind of crawling around, you'll notice from time to time they look back at mom or dad, whoever the primary caregiver is. And you'll see like they'll go exploring, but they're never out of sight. They're never without like a few, like maybe 5 or 6 crawls away from from their caregiver, from their secure base. And you could kind of think of a secure base kind of like the Death Star, right? So the TIE fighters, they don't really fly that far away from the Death Star. They kind of stay within vision of it. They go on exploration and then they come back. And so that's sort of, I like Star Wars. I don't know if I mentioned that, but I did mention that because I showed you my cup. So yeah, that's I think the best example I can give. Best metaphor is secure base is a Death Star, um, and and then the baby is just a little TIE fighter. People who don't know what Star Wars is are like, I don't know what you're talking about. Let me see if I can find a picture. I had people in my class last semester, and they were like, I don't know what Star Wars is. And I'm like, how do you not know what Star Wars is? It's like one of the best, well marketed television shows or movies of the last decade, 2 or 3 decades. Okay, so this is the Death Star. I'm such a nerd. Okay, so the Death Star is a space station. Let me find a good picture. So the Death Star is a space station in the Star Wars trilogy. Um, let's see if I slide this over here, can you see it? No. Okay. So you learn stuff that's not related to developmental psychology, but helps illustrate a point. So the Death Star. I got a lot of references to Star Wars on my teaching evaluations this semester. So the Death Star is a big space station. It has this huge cannon on it, and it can destroy planets, which why it's called the Death Star. It's the size of a small moon. In fact, it's mistaken for a small moon in Episode 4, or the New Hope. Uh, I'm such a nerd. I cannot believe. Oh Lord. And then a TIE fighter is a little battleship. Let me find one. Um, oh, such a nerd. Oh, here's a perfect one with a TIE fighter and a Death Star. Perfect illustration of what we're talking about. So here we have the Death Star, and then these are little like tiny small fighter ships, and they fly away. The Death Star has like all these little landing bays, and so they fly out of them, and they don't really ever go very far from the Death Star because they don't have a very good range. Though I guess they could like go into lights like hyperdrive or something. I don't know. I think talking about Star Wars in some instances is more interesting than what we're talking about in class, just because I really like Star Wars. Um, okay, one last picture. So see, like here's close up on the Death Star, and you can see like here's a little docking bay where you can park your little ships like in there. So then the little Tie Fighters come out, and okay, let's move back. Let's go back to class now. I could talk about Star Wars all day. Okay, so that's fear. And then we won't really talk about disdain today because that's not something that develops right away. Just for all you inside out lovers who wanted to know why we didn't talk about disdain, that's why. So, um, the reason we talk about emotions in such detail is that emotions, one, form the bulk of personality development in MC and toddlerhood, but also they play an important role in social development because we use emotions when we're socializing. And one of the ways that infants and toddlers do this is through social referencing. And this is when we actively seek emotional information from a trusted person in an uncertain situation. And so you'll see children do this all the time. You go up and meet a child for the first time, a little baby, and you're like, oh, hi, what's your name? And they kind of do this. They have that look. And maybe they'll look at mom. That's social referencing. They're seeking emotional information from a trusted person. They're not sure how to respond, and so they're trying to figure out what emotion they should be exhibiting. So if mom looks afraid, then they're going to know to be afraid. If mom looks calm and okay about it, then they're going to feel more calm about it. Um, by 18 to 22 months, so a little over a year to about 2 years, we start to see self-conscious emotions. So um, emotions about ourselves, about the way that we are, about the way that we're doing. So they typically involve injury or enhancement to our sense of self. So, if we may feel sad if we are embarrassed or if we mess up, we may feel happy or joyful if we do something right. Um, other, but other self-conscious emotions could be something like guilt, where guilt is feeling like you're not good enough, that what you've done, that you're not good enough, that you're not acceptable, there's something wrong with you. Shame, you feel bad because you did something wrong. So there's not necessarily nothing necessarily wrong with you, but you've done something wrong. So there's a huge difference between guilt and shame. Feeling guilty is I wasn't good enough, whereas shame is I did not do something right. Embarrassment, so I deviated from my identity, and that causes me to be very uncomfortable. Envy, I want that. I want somebody else's thing. Pride. Pride isn't always a bad thing. You can feel proud And people always assign pride as a bad thing, and it's not bad. It's not wrong to be proud of yourself and proud of what you've accomplished. Pride becomes bad when you use it to make other people feel bad or feel less than you, or when you're not acknowledging that other people have gotten to where you got helped you get to where you currently are. And so guilt, shame, embarrassment, envy, and pride are all you can sort of parallel them to other emotions. So pride and happiness can be very similar because you can also use happiness in a bad way. You can be so happy that you hurt other people, that you ignore other people's unhappiness. Um, Embarrassment, could be a form of sadness or anger, or disdain or fear. Uh, Same with envy. Um, Guilt and shame, more often than not, are associated with sadness. Um, we also see development um, of emotional self-regulation, and these are strategies that we use to adjust the intensity of our emotions. And so it's not always acceptable to explode like this. And so as a child, but most small children do. But as children get older, they start to self-regulate better. They start to come up with strategies where they're not acting out in maladaptive ways just because they're feeling an emotion. And one of these strategies is effortful control, and this is a voluntary, purposeful management of emotions that develops from about age 2 to onwards. And so, like for example, if you're driving and somebody cuts you off and you really want to ram them with your car, um, you could potentially do that, or you could exhibit effortful control and say, I'm angry. I'm mindful of that. I acknowledge that I have a right to be angry, but I also acknowledge that I don't want to go to prison or hurt someone. So I'm not going to ram their car, but I'm going to think about it and I will enjoy thinking about it. And that is emotion self-regulation in a nutshell. Along with the development of emotion, we start to see the development of temperament. And so, temperament is an early, stable, individual differences in reactivity, which is the quickness and intensity of our emotions, and self regulation, so controlling our reactivity. And there are three different kinds of temperament. So, easy children are routine oriented, easygoing, cheerful, and adaptive. And so, most children fall into this category. Um, they they like things the way they're supposed to be, but at the same time they're pretty compliant, pretty cheerful, and they're pretty well easy to adapt. Now this doesn't mean that easy children are never upset or they never cry or they're never cranky. It just means for the most part they'll go with the flow. They'll adapt. They're not gonna get so upset that they can't function. I was an easy child. I asked my mom. She said I was very easy. Um, She said I was cranky though. I was a very cranky baby. I liked things the way that I liked them, and I did not like it when things were not the way that I liked them, which, I mean, is basically how I am today. I really haven't changed that much. But for the most part, was willing to adapt when necessary. Um, Difficult children make up about 10% of the population. And these are children with irregular routines, so they just kind of do whatever they want. They hate change. They react negatively and intensely to everything. So these are children who are always, always moody, and we've all known a child like this, and we probably dislike them very much. And then slow to warm up children. My sister Catherine is slow to warm up. Um, Inactive, mostly mild to low key reactions to environment, negative moods, and slow adjustments to change. For the most part, it's kind of like, eh, whatever. But I'm also really cranky and do not particularly enjoy change. But for the most part, I'm not reacting to anything in the environment. And our temperament develops into our personality traits. And for the most part, temperament is pretty stable across the lifespan. That's not to say that you can't become more easygoing over time or that you don't become more difficult over time. For the most part, we stay the same. You'll notice that 40 plus 10 plus 15 does not equal 100, and that's because the majority of people, so that's 65%. So 35% of the population can't be categorized easily into one of these three categories. So the categories aren't hard and fast either. Along with temperament, we have this concept called attachment. And essentially, what attachment is our bond with our caregivers. Um, and we I think this can be best demonstrated in going off to college. And the first couple of weeks of college, you miss your mom a lot, or you miss your dad a lot, whoever your primary caregiver was. Or you may miss both of your parents. I mean, it's variable, but I remember when I went to college, the first week I missed my mom, and I still do. I'm like 25 years old, and I still miss my mom most days. And when I'm upset, I want my mom. And that's because we have a good attachment. We have a bond that has been there for 25 years. Um, you want to have a good, secure attachment with your primary caregiver. As you grow, as you develop, and you get older, that attachment, your primary attachment, will transfer. If you get married, it should transfer to your spouse. Where that doesn't mean that your parents don't mean as much to you, but your you rely on that spouse for all of your emotional support. And I think that's really what attachment is all about, is who do you rely upon for your emotional support? Who gets the regulation or gets to experience the regulation of all of your emotional reactivity? Um, who is the one person who can comfort you when no one else can? And that's what attachment is. When a person's really small, the best way to identify what kind of attachment style they have is to use the strange situation task. And what happens is it's developed by Mary Ainsworth. Um, you have the mom and the child playing, and then the mom leaves, and a stranger comes in, and it's a strange situation. It's something that's new to the child. And then the way the child reacts when the mother leaves, the way they react with the stranger, and the way they react when the mother comes back. And I say mother, it could be primary caregiver, but most of the research we do with children is done with moms because moms overwhelmingly are the primary caregiver. And so there are four types of attachment that Ainsworth has identified. The first is secure attachment. And this is what we want. We want people to have secure attachment. And that's when we use the parent as a secure base. So, that doesn't mean that when mom leaves that baby is not going to cry. Baby probably will cry. But when mom comes back to the room, baby is going to immediately come back to mom and be comforted by mom. And that is a secure base, a secure attachment, because that child is receiving all of their emotional support from that parent. Avoidant attachment is not something that you really want. It's not as bad as the other two, but it's an indifference to the parent's presence or absence. So, it's sort of like, I don't really care if mom is here or if mom is gone. And so these babies tend to not get upset at all. They have no emotional reactivity when mom leaves. They're indifferent. They don't really care that much. Not necessarily bad. It's not the ideal. People like this tend to not develop strong emotional relationships with other people as easily. So you really want to go for the secure attachment, but avoidance not so bad either. Resistant attachment is less desirable, and these children tend to be very clingy. And when mom leaves, they get very upset, and when mom comes back, they're very clingy and very angry and very abusive to mom. They may hit mom, they may scream at mom, they may be emotionally manipulative of mom. They do not like to be separated. So that is, you do not want to have a resistant attached child. The last, disorganized and disoriented attachment, is the greatest insecurity, and it's hard. It's hard to identify, but typically the best way to do it is if it looks like it's contradictory, like if it looks like their behaviors are contradictory, then they're probably disorganized or disoriented, because they tend to act in contradictory ways when the parent returns. So like the parent comes back and they were really upset when the parents when they were crying, but then they ignore the parent when they come back. So, it's sort of like they have the avoidant attachment reaction when the parent comes back. They're indifferent, but they had the secure attachment slash resistant attachment, like really upset when mom left. And so it's very contradictory when you're like when you see the child crying and you expect them to seek comfort in some way and then they don't. That's when you would know, oh, that's disorganized attachment. Now, prior to Mary Ainsworth coming up with these categories, um, Harlow did a study with rhesus monkeys, and this is when he really established how we attach to our caregivers. Um, there, for a long time, was this proposal that children are only attached to their mothers because their mothers provide them with nourishment. But Harlow said, no, I think attachment is much more emotional and psychological than this. And so what he did was he put these rhesus monkeys in a cage with two different mothers. And both mothers were made out of wire netting with a little monkey like mask on top of them. One of the monkeys had a bottle with food in it, but it was just wire. The other had no food, but it was soft. It was covered in a soft little blanket thing. And so what they found was that the monkeys would go to the food mom for food, but then they would spend all the rest of their time with the soft mom with the blanket. Um, then they did a second task to see, well, who would they go to for comfort? Will they go to the mom with food or the mom with the blanket? And so they introduced a scary stimuli, which you'll see in the video. It's hilarious. And lo and behold, the monkey went to the soft mom. They didn't care about the food mom. The food mom only existed to feed them. They didn't care about it. And so what this led us to understand as psychologists is that there is a very much an emotional comfort aspect and a psychological comfort aspect to attachment. It's not just, well, where can I get my food from? And we see this with other animals as well, like dogs. Dogs, appreciate someone who feeds them, but at the end of the day, they just want to get in bed with you and cuddle with you. Cats pretend like they don't care, but cats do care. I've known enough cats who acted like they were completely indifferent to you, but in a scary situation, they just wanted you to hold them and tell them it was going to be okay. So ultimately, animals, and we are animals, we have to acknowledge that, do have this very intense emotional need to be connected to someone else. For next time, I'd like for you to watch the video link provided here and answer the following questions. So you're going to be watching a strange situation task, and I want you to watch specifically the second infant. And they say in the video that she doesn't exhibit separation anxiety, but that it may be due to her young age. So they acknowledge that there may be some issue with their experiment, but they are replicating an experiment. So I want you to tell me, looking at lecture 2, look back at lecture 2 if you need help, but what kind of variable does the infant's age represent? The second thing I want you to do is to pretend that the infant's age doesn't matter, that the baby is acting in a normal way. Um, Tell me then, identify what their attachment style is for the second infant. So watch this video. Again, on the previous slide, there's a link for the Harlow attachment study video. You should watch that. But watch this one for your discussion board question. Put in the subject, put discussion 7 or class 7 or something, just so I know which one you're doing. You all are doing really well with your discussion board, so keep up the good work. So I'll give you a second to kind of jot down some notes here, and then we'll move forward. All right. We are finishing up early today. Don't get used to it. The first couple classes, or the first section when we talk about infants and newborns, we go pretty slow, and this is just me kind of warming you up to the material. As we move into childhood and adolescence and adulthood, we're going through a long age range. We're not just right now. We're just covering a couple years. So once we move into the other material, the classes will go back up to about 80 minutes, 70 to 80 minutes, because we're going to be covering a lot of information. So don't get used to it. This is just sort of a break. But I want for you to, for class 8, for tomorrow, read pages 215 to 251. And then I want you to pretend that you have a 3-year-old daughter while you're reading. So pretend you have a 3-year-old daughter and ask yourself the question, what can you do to support her motor development? Remember Friday, we have that we have movie night 1 on Friday night. If you are planning on coming to that, please let me know. If no one's going to be here, I'm not going to come back up to campus. So just email me and let me know if you're coming or not. So let me know either way. Just email me and let me know either way if you're going to come to movie night or not. If you can't, that's not a big deal. You can, I had some students email me, you can watch it at home if you want to. You have to rent it though. There's not, that I could find, not a free version that you can't that you can use without having to illegally download it. I mean, you could illegally download it. I'm not gonna I'm not the police. I'm not advocating that you do that. Just for the official record, I'm not saying that you should do that. I'm just saying that you could potentially do that if you made that independent decision without me telling you to do it. But you can rent it on Amazon and watch it online. And the movie is Boys Don't Cry with Hilary Swank. There's nothing due right now. Just keep reading and let me know if you have any questions. darcy.corbetthall@ndsu.edu. Have a wonderful day and I'll see you tomorrow.